So, 6 steps to completing your dissertation: drudgery, procrastination, panic, despair, drudgery, printing. A few other versions of that. So, what we're going to look at today is what is the research proposal, what are ethical considerations, and then going through the ethics form. So you've got an idea of what the ethics form is about up front, and you need to know what's going to be going into it. The form is being amended, so when the new one is done, we will re-look at that in one of the seminars in detail. Okay? But you're not using the ethics form for your submission. You only use the ethics form next semester for the level 6 dissertation proposal. But this will give you an idea of the sorts of things you've got to think about and consider. And that's why I'm going to just briefly go through the ethics form today as well to cover that. Okay. So you've got to write a formal proposal outlining your chosen research question and your intended approach. This is the overall goal of any research proposal. You need to have a clearly defined question, a brief literature review, a clear methodology, and data analysis description. Okay, this is in a formal research proposal that you're doing next year. So I'm just covering some of the elements you need to know. So it's the things we've touched on. What are you intending to study? How are you going to study this? How are you going to analyze your data to make sense of it? The what, when, where, how, for of the research process. What are you studying? How do you intend to collect that data? How are you going to analyze what you've collected to answer your question? Have you collected the right data to answer your question? And that's an important element. One of the important areas around any dissertation process is your supervisor, and you'll be allocated your supervisor next semester. So once we know who's all passed and gone through up to level 6, we will then allocate the supervisor. There's been a provisional allocation done, but we'll see who comes up, who comes back, who doesn't. Some people intermit, there's life issues, as you've already seen in the class, there's a number of people who have gone off for various reasons. So once you're up into level 6, then you'll be formally allocated your supervisor. And I say we do that quite simply because we don't have the depth to allocate according to expertise, and you can't all have Jane, so it will be allocated out. And Maria's not in next semester, so we've got to reconsider who's going to be here and how that will play out. Okay, whether I've got one part-time person or a full-time, it depends on how we recruit for Maria's pregnancy period. But meeting with your supervisor is important. They keep you on track. They keep guiding you, even though they might not be thinking that half the time. But that is their goal, to keep you going. Okay? If you don't meet with them, your research proposal does need to be signed off by them, and that you need to meet with them regularly to ensure that you are staying on track with the right stuff. I had 3 students last semester, the January starts from last year, who failed to show for a single supervision session. After their research proposal went in, I never saw them again. They all failed because they wrote gobbledygook, because they didn't follow through properly on what they had originally proposed. They just did their own thing. The one who did attend got a first. Okay? It is possible to get a first for your dissertation. As I say, once you've got your question, it's then a matter of following the recipe. But which cake are you baking is what you have to determine first, and which method you're going to use to bake that cake. Once you've got that, then you follow the steps, and you will get there. You follow them diligently, and you write well, you will get it. So the second part of the research proposal is the ethical considerations that you have to take into account. And this is primarily what most research committees are looking at. Are there any ethical concerns about what you intend doing? How are these going to be addressed? Have they fully been taken into account? Okay, So it will be assessed first for ethical implications by your supervisor, then by the dissertation coordinator, and then by the ethics committee. So there's 3 levels of checks around ethics. 99% of you do not have ethical issues. The ones that you do have are minor, and if your supervisor feels you've met them adequately, then the committee will sign off on them. Okay? So you generally don't have to worry about that. You do need to remember at level 6 that your ethical proposal counts 10% towards your final grade, and that can make the difference between a first and a second. So, have you got ethics? BACP framework gives clear guidance on research. Read that, make sure you know it, make sure you understand it. Okay? So it's committed to fostering research that will inform and develop practice. And this is why we have placed a bigger emphasis on research than in the previous degree. It must be taken with rigorous attention to the quality and integrity of both the research itself and the dissemination of results, how you publicize the results afterwards. The rights of research participants must be considered and protected. Minimum rights include the right to freely give informed consent. Will you ensure and what will be needed for your client or your participant? They're not clients, they're participants. For your participants to give informed consent. What information do you need to provide them so they can say, yes, I know what you're doing, and that's okay. Okay. They have the right to withdraw at any point. Okay. And if you're investigating a service, that their willingness to participate or not participate does not impinge upon their ability to access the service. So if you're doing a double-blind study on whether CBT works for depression in single mothers, just because they refuse doesn't mean they can't get treatment. They'll be seen by somebody else and not included in the project, but they're still entitled to their treatment. Should comply with good standards of practice in counseling overall. Okay. So the BPS, which is the big research psychology bunch, have similar kinds of principles that you take into account. To respect the autonomy and dignity of persons involved, straightforward. You're not to humiliate, embarrass, shame your people who you are doing research on. Okay? You have a responsibility to develop and follow procedures for valid consent, confidentiality, anonymity, fair treatment, and due process. So people who are taking part in your research are doing you a favor. Treat them nicely. Say thank you and please. What needs to be done in order to meet the requirements of the due process of law? Every step must be followed in a correct and timely manner. Okay. It's no use saying getting participants to agree to one thing and then you change your mind and you do something else and you use them as well. You know, due process needs to be followed. It needs to be of scientific value. It needs to have quality, integrity, and contribute to knowledge and understanding where you can. Research that is judged to be poorly designed or wastes resources or devalues just are not on. Okay? Don't do something meaningless. It needs to be meaningful, at least for yourself. It needs to engage and contribute to the knowledge of the profession as a whole. There is a level of social responsibility in any research because you're going out into the community, even if it's the community of NUC College or the community of counseling students here. You are going out into a community where you have a responsibility to ensure that this is done fairly and clearly, and the context in which you are working needs to be taken into account. Okay. So you're not to do research that perpetuates or encourages discrimination in any shape or form. So there are various check checklists that are available out there for you to tick off as you go through, to see whether you are on track and yet you're thinking about all the different aspects. It's important to be thorough and to state the obvious. What might be obvious to you will not necessarily be obvious to others. So even if it sounds ludicrous, state it sometimes. How will you explain the purpose of the inquiry and methods to be used that are accurate and understandable to those who you are researching? Okay, so will the participants understand what you are researching? So you're investigating, I don't know, what's a nice technical, complex manner issue? Okay, the influence of power relationships between counselor and therapist in psychodynamic psychotherapy. Client's not going to understand that necessarily. We know what we're talking about. How are you going to explain that in a language to them? We're looking at issues of control within the therapy process. Okay, so you've got to look at how you're going to translate your research language into simple English for the client to read. Or to put it in another way, is taking it from legalese into language that we can all understand. You know, we've all tried to read lawyers' documents, and we go, right, what did that mean? Same idea here. What your research topic is needs to be translated into a meaningful language. Why should the research participate in your project? Why should they take part? How are you going to motivate them to take part? What's the motivation for them? Yours is getting your dissertation done. Why should I take part in your project? It's meaningless. That doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter to me. Getting my dissertation, getting your dissertation. What will they gain from taking part? No? Yeah. They might gain an insight into their life. Then you will be contributing to an important area in which you have had XYZ issues or problems. No, but that's too broad. How does that benefit them? They're contributing to research, yes, but how does that benefit them? That the findings from this will inform practice and help you receive better treatment. Yeah, reflection, a more greater understanding, a clarity about a problem, a chance to discuss and share something that they might not have before. Okay, so you've got to look at how you're going to hook them in. No money, may not pay, unless it's part of an experimental process. And none of you, please do experiments. You don't have the time for it. Okay. In what way, if any, will conducting the research put people at risk, be that psychological, legal, political, becoming ostracized? Or them just taking part in the project, that people suddenly realize, oh, I didn't know you were HIV positive. Okay? That the process of doing the research mustn't cause an ethical issue. If you're doing it somewhere that is identified personal data in terms of the Data Protection Act, you need to be careful about how and where you research them. Because say you're doing something on HIV positives and the psychology or counseling HIV positive people, and nobody in the class knows that they're HIV positive. They don't want everybody to know. Okay? It's anonymized. Yeah, always anonymized. Okay? How will you promise confidentiality? How will you ensure that it's honored? Informed consent? How will you provide the necessary protection? Who will have access to the data and for what purposes? How will you and your respondents be affected by conducting this research? Who will be the researchers confident and counsel on matters of ethics during the study, i.e. your supervisor? How hard will you push for data? What ethical framework and philosophy informs your work and ensures respect and sensitivity for those you study, beyond whichever may be required by law?
What do you mean, how will you push the data? I know that's got to do with quantity. What's exactly got
Well, we're doing an interview and I want to know about your childhood sexual abuse. And now you don't want to talk about it. But come on, I've got to get this information. I'm not going to pass my dissertation. Come on, Stephen, you've got to tell me a little more. Now you're breaking down in tears, and I'm right next. You've got to use your counseling skills and be sensitive to your data collection process. If you are distressing the client, you best stop.
What about forming a contract with them? Do we form a contract with them?
Yes, that's part of the informed consent. Okay. So, no psychological or physical harm. Not allowed to do experiments that cause them physical or emotional distress. Okay, unless it's been cleared by an ethics committee and is part of an experimental process. So, treating alcoholics for their alcoholism using shock therapy. So every time they pick up a drink, it shocks them. Yes, up to a point that's causing physical harm, but all of that would then need to be clearly regulated. That the voltage would not go above XYZ, and it's an experiment that's clearly controlled and managed. If you think of the Milgram experiments, okay, and the shock experiments, where the researcher was pressing the person to keep on shocking, and they did it. So a man in a white coat has lots of authority. Just continue. But he's being hurt. Just continue. Okay, informed consent. What makes up informed consent? So that will depend very much on what you are researching and what they need to know. The right to withdraw or withhold information is given. You keep them anonymous and confidential. So there's no names collected, people. Even in interviews, you do not collect names. You use pseudonyms or a numbering system that you know who you've interviewed. But once you've done your interviewing, that information is cleared out and you have anonymous data. So it's participant 1, 2, 3, 4. And if somebody else should find the data, they cannot relate that data back to a particular person. Yes, the right to withdraw and withhold is I don't want to talk about that area, I don't want to answer those questions. That's their right. So you might end up with some incomplete data sometimes, which can be informative in and of itself about some things. Is it the way you've worded the questions? Is it the area that needs to be researched? What's it telling you when a client won't give you that information? Yeah, you generally wouldn't include it. You might discuss if you've got a high number of incomplete data. It will depend on the data. If it's statistical data and you need to include whatever into a statistical analysis process, then you can't include it. If it's an interview process, then that becomes part of your data analysis and a reflection on it, depending on your method being used. Okay, so it's got to be kept confidential, but it also has to be anonymized. So no deception is allowed, and you need to, where appropriate, a debriefing afterwards. What do I mean by debriefing afterwards?
You have to see how, if they have anything or something back on them, how to release them from that. Just
Yeah.
checking on them.
Need to check in on them, yeah. Have they been disturbed by this? It's like the thing at the end of those BBC programs where they've had domestic violence or suicide or whatever. If you have been affected by this program, please phone the helpline. Well, it's the same kind of idea, people. That's what you've got to think about around your ethical considerations. Depends on what you're researching and what might be needed. Is it then a referral to the GP, a local counselling service, a complaints commission, depending on what you've been looking at? So you would have to look at what would help hold the client post-research. It doesn't mean you have to take them on for counseling. Okay, you've got to look carefully at your interpretations or findings. Okay, because this is an interpretation process. Depending on the method you're using, you will analyze your results in different ways, and it will give you different answers. And if you want something to confirm your beliefs, you will find it. And that's what you have to watch out for.
What do you mean by that, Kevin?
You want falsification, yeah. You find the results are actually false, not positive. They're not correct, because you've manipulated the data to look like the answer you want. So, a famous one was around the IQ tests. And the IQ tests were seen as valid and stable, but all black people therefore are stupid, because look, they couldn't score above 80%. The fact that it was a culturally biased test, it was confirming their beliefs. Their interpretation of the results was saying. And they, it was a huge political element. Okay, so next year you hand both in as a single document. You're not handing in the ethics this time, although it'll be part of your considerations. There'll be a discussion around ethics. But when you hand this in, it's the two-part element. You're handing in your research proposal and the ethical considerations. Next semester you hand both in. This term, it's an essay format. You're not using the ethics form. Yes. What? There is a form. I'm going to go through it in a moment. There's a proper ethics form that needs to be gone and tick boxes covered, and it's a bit technical. That's why David's re-looking at it, and we're trying to rejig it because it's make it less complicated. Okay, but as a single one, they normally hand it in together. So in your essay, you're including your research proposal. Within that research proposal, you're writing about the ethical considerations. Okay.
I'm sorry, but the document itself comes as an appendix.
Which? The ethics form. No, you fill it in. It's a Word document. Yeah, we'll go through it in now. Okay. So some key points to remember before next year in particular, they all have to be approved before you can progress with your project. If you progress with your project without ethical approval, it's treated as an academic offense. Because we have had people go ahead and do research without ethical approval. And one was doing research with primary school kids without getting parental permission or the school's permission, because he worked there so he could just get it.
Some people are idiots, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, it's not so much idiots as they haven't thought it through. That's all. They haven't done the due consideration. They haven't followed a process. And remember, this is all about the research process. Have you followed the steps of the research process? So, your assignment is not the ethics application, it's your research proposal. Okay, your assignment's due for the 12th of June. Stefan.
Just to be sure, yeah? To see where it says submission date, could you put there 2359.00 so we know not to go over that into the seconds? Because I got confused with that. I thought that I could have it in before midnight.
Dang. Pro. Oh. That's making it too long, Stefan. It's 23:59. Not 23:59:01. It's 1 minute to midnight. It's midnight. Right? Get it in. Yes. Got examples. We'll begin to look at them after the Easter break, so you can begin to look at what are good and what are bad ones. Okay. So 12th of June, 3,000 word research proposal. Okay. I say half baked, elements will not work. Formative task, 20th of April. I want a clearly defined topic and research question. Because if you haven't got it by then, you ain't going to be going very far. Okay? So, what is your area? What is your question? Why are you doing this area? One page, 500 to 1,000 words, whatever you want. If you want to write more, that's fine. But I need to see from each of you that you are on track on a research area. Because if not, then we need to sit down and help you work one out. Yes. Yeah. So it's clearly structured. What is your topic area? Why are you choosing this topic area? What is the brief literature you've looked at so far indicating? What is your question? What would the data look like? If you've got to the point of thinking about some methodologies, you can maybe put them in. I'm thinking of doing it either this way or that way. Okay? But the goal for the formative is I need to see you are on track with a topic. Because if you're not on track by the topic halfway through the term, you're going to be running into problems. Okay, so your thesis is always written in blood, sweat and tears with lots of coffee. Coffee, Red Bull, same difference. And it feels like it, people, I can tell you that now. Dissertation is hard work, it takes time, it takes effort, it's something you've got to be reasonably passionate about to keep your interest, otherwise you won't want to go near it. There has to be something that keeps drawing you in because you're curious about something. You want to know about something. If it's not holding you, it's going to be, oh my God, this is a slog. It's like weeding a garden. Unless you enjoy weeding, you ain't going to do it. So, I'm just going to go through the research ethical approval form briefly so you know what it looks like. You don't have to worry about it now. That we'll deal with again next semester in detail of when you try to fill it in. Okay? So the form has a basic information. At this stage it comes with dialog boxes down the side which tells you what's required in each of the elements. Okay? So you are title of research project, start and end dates, details of any financial support, any other researchers involved. So you might work collaboratively with a lecturer who might be busy on a project with something else. If you can get that, go for it. Okay? Who are your participants and how many are you looking at? So who are they? College students, college staff, and not Newham college students, members of the public. Now there's certain ones that are starred, which if you have any of these, you need to go to section 14 of the box. These are the populations that raise the questions around ethical considerations. Okay, so clinical populations, what do we mean by that? Yeah, anybody with a clear diagnosis or pathology or problem. Okay, people in custody, people with mental health issues, children under 18, people with learning or communication difficulties, people engaged in illegal activities, example drug taking. Okay, so if you are going to be researching drug addicts out on the street, of how addicts score, that puts you at risk because you're engaged in an illegal activity. And what are the legal and ethical implications around that? Might. Might you haven't reported an illegal activity. But this is where those are the considerations. If you're being an observer of a situation, would that put you at risk if somebody sees you watching them drug deal? Yes, there's subjects that can't be researched because could do with it, but can't be researched because of the ethical and dangers involved. I mean, some people do. They do take those risks. But it has to be a considered and a plan put in place. If that should happen, what are the steps to be taken? So if you do get nicked and you end up in a you end up in jail in under the Security Forces Terrorism Act for 48 hours. Who are we going to inform? Okay, the aims and research questions of the project, the background of the research project, a brief outline of the project, and study method. So those are the key elements that your assignment needs to cover by definition. If you're going to be taking your assignment from this semester and adding it into this form for next semester, those are the considerations. Who are the participants? Inclusion, exclusion, how you're going to recruit them, aims, background, why you're doing it, what's been done previously, the research methods. Okay. Who are your participants? So these are particular tick box questions, and depending on which you tick, you either get ethical considerations, no significance, or needs to be looked at further. So, what is it? It's the standard research sorts of questions that are covered there. We'll go through. And then ethical approval is granted or not granted. If it's not granted, you've got to relook at it and redo it. Another important element is here at the end. Please ensure you attach copies of all relevant supporting documents where appropriate, as approval to proceed cannot be granted until these are received. Information sheet for participants, consent form for participants, debriefing information, any other supporting documents. So this is giving you why we've again shifted it, is by next semester, when you begin this, you should have a very good, very clear idea of what you're doing, what questionnaires you are using, and have them readily available for your application. Yeah, but you need to define them in your research proposal. Yeah. You got to, not for this now, but maybe this is part of what I'm looking at, thinking about. The more detail you have now, yes, the more you have now, the so you got to get consent first. Must be signed consent, people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So if I hand it out here, you all sign the consent form. I think like we did last semester for Aurora. She was doing on motion sickness. The front sheet was a consent form. I agreed to take part in this. There was inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. If you have this, you can continue. If not, you don't. That covers all of those elements. Okay, so not all you necessarily know. Under review, this is a track, what's called the tracking function for track changes and the comments boxes. You've got to get rid of them later on. Make sure you know how to get rid of these elements and use them. Okay? But we'll come to that, because otherwise they appear in your proposal when you submit it. Because even if you hide it for some reason, when it converts to a PDF via Turnitin, it brings them all back. So it just doesn't look great. But we can look at that later. So you have to read to come up with a sensible question. Your method will depend on your research question. So the more you refine your question, the more you'll get to the method needed. Your group will depend on your research method and what your question is. And your data collection will depend on all of the above. Okay? What? I've no idea. Right, so it's a dissertation proposal or a research proposal is what you're putting in. 3,000 words. What do you need to consider? So it feels like a daunting task. What's overwhelming? Hey, Mo? Mm.
Maybe I'm going to go too far. I don't know. I could do with
Yeah. Well, that's what this process is. You've got to talk it through. Talk with each other. Form mini groups. Form areas of commonality. If you find out your people are doing similar areas, form a support research group. Okay? So share your stuff if you want to. Put it out on the research methods forum. So I'm doing research in the following, or considering doing the following. Who else is looking at this? What kind of things are you considering? What have you thought about? Create a discussion forum, people, on the new learning page. Build it up and get collaborative work going. You might all be doing something on depression, but you each are going to be taking a different angle or a different level on the same topic. But you'll be reading around the area, so you'll also be gathering readings, research articles that you can share. And that is called collaborative research and is allowed. It's not cheating. Give each other that support. So, you need a topic. You need to have a clearly defined area of research which articulates into a clear topic and a viable research question. What is your broad area? Within that, what is your topic? Within that, what is your specific question? So by now you should all at least have settled on an area. If not, you certainly need to spend some time this weekend settling down onto an area. As I say, by the end of the Easter break, your topic and viable research question needs to be reasonably articulated. Okay, and that's where reading comes in.
You know, when you showed the ethical sheet, right, and you said, so even if you wanted to do research in a clinical area, as long as you get permission, you can do that.
Yes. Yes. It's not again, you can't not do those. I mean, those are the areas that psychology and counseling research. Are the clinical populations, depression, alcohol, couples counseling, abuse, neglect. Okay? But it's about what are the considerations. That's all the ethical form. It's not saying you can't. It's saying have you thought carefully about, by studying this area, what are the implications for the person taking part? And for you as well. There are some research areas that are traumatizing.
If you want, for example, if you want to interview prisoners, how can I go about?
You have to get permission of the prison services first of all. So
And how do I approach them?
that's you. You've got to approach the management body. And that's again, the prison services falls in the same category as the NHS. The likelihood of getting that permission is probably very slim. 1. 2, it will take too long possibly to get that permission. So if you want to begin looking at it now. If you have access to that, it's great. It's a population. It's something you can utilize and use. But you have to go through their permission and ethical board as well as ours. It's a two-step process if you're going to be using a big institution like a hospital or prisons. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that the time frame in which you've got for your dissertation often doesn't allow it, because to get the permission to get to your data might take 6 months because of their bureaucracy.
So really I should start now if I was looking.
Yes. Yes. You need to get principal approval in principle from them to even think of going that area. Yeah, from the head of the prison, and he might have to go to the head of prisons in overall or whatever. There's a policy. There will be a policy on research in prisons. Right. You need to have a literature review. This is going to form the bulk of your research proposal. This is at least 1,000, 1,500 words. Okay? For this assignment. Not for your proposal next year, for this assignment. Okay? In your research proposal, for this assessment task, you have to have these, but you also need, I'm looking that you have done a good literature review on the topic, that you have done the readings in the area required, that you are up to date.
How many words?
About 1,500, about half, between 40 and 60 of this. Because I want to see that you've done a solid grounding for this assignment.
Many articles from the article are blocked.
That's what I heard.
What do you mean?
As soon as you get into the, like you go on here, you start.
They're not a full PDF. Yeah, so those ones, read the abstracts. If you really need them, you take that information to the library and they can get it from the British Library for you.
It'll take a couple of weeks to come.
Yeah, it'll take a while to come, but it's fairly quick. It's normally about a 2-week period. They said it's a 2-week turnaround depending on the British Library.
When they get them from the British Library, is that then accessible through EBSCO?
No, they give it to you in person. A print off. Yes. To access the British Library, you can all go. You need a proof of ID, a proof of address, and you can register. And proof of being a student, and that you're researching a particular topic. Okay, go online, have a look at becoming a British Library member. Okay, and go during the week to register because Saturdays are rather busy.
When you say up-to-date research, is that in the last 2 years? Is that
In the last 2 years, yes, the most up-to-date research.
so you can't use it?
You can use other stuff, but I want to see 2014, 2015 articles. Yes.
Does it matter if a lot of the literature is from like America?
No. As long as you are taking account, how does that apply here?
I know you've got to do majority of the journals, but for a basic explanation of that topic, can you use books?
Yes, you can use books as well. You'll find a core book that will inform you or guide you. There'll be a key author. Those are good books to look at. And from there, you look at their reading list and generate out and begin to look up those names. So don't try and invent the wheel from nothing. Find a key book or journal article, look at the key authors in that article, look those authors up and see what they've done subsequently. Okay, because those are normally prolific producers of research. So it needs to be up-to-date research. Why do you want to do this topic? What's your motivation? You need to give me a reason. And what's the benefits of studying this topic? Needs to be part of that. So out of this literature review, well, I'm studying this because recovering from domestic violence is an under-researched issue that needs further support, particularly amongst Asian women. Something like that. And you justify your motivation based on your reading. Not because I think it's interesting and I feel like it. Not quite good enough. Right? How will it contribute to the profession? How will it benefit the clients? This is an area where not enough information is known. You need to show clear consideration of the ethics. Okay, so you have a section saying ethical considerations or recommendations or whatever you want to call it. A solid and clearly demonstrated consideration of ethics, how these will be addressed. So state the obvious. Confidentiality will be addressed by. Data will be kept anonymous through. So state the obvious. How will you structure the research process to meet ethical standards? So data collection method will be one-on-one individual interviews in a private place where the rest of the counseling level 5 class can't see them. Or it's an anonymous survey done across every class in NUC. So everybody gets a chance. And to demonstrate clear BITP ethical standards have been looked at and considered and referred to where appropriate. And this is where we're going to be moving on to next week and mainly after Easter. What is your research design? Okay. What is the blueprint of your house going to look like? Is it a double story, a bungalow, a caravan? This is what the important part comes in, people. A well articulated and theory based Okay? You need to be able to say why you're using a particular approach based in the theory. What questions are being asked determines your data. Data determines your research design. Do not force fit square pegs into round holes, people. Cannot repeat this often enough, because I've seen too many dissertations where students have tried to force their data to fit what they wanted, and they end up getting either a poor grade or failing completely.
Do you think that's because they're too passionate about their subject?
No, they want to avoid stats, for the most part. Do not be scared of stats. They are manageable. The level at which you will be doing any stats is minimal, and as I said, you can be able to do most of them on an Excel spreadsheet. So do not be scared of stats. We will help you through with that. Okay? So, from your research method, you need, from your research design, you find your method. Okay? Define, describe the method you will use. What are the instruments of collection? Do they need a pilot study? Are they valid and reliable? How will you collect? Will it collect the data you need? Because you might find an interesting questionnaire on happiness, but is it collecting the data you need about happiness? Will it answer your question? Will Beck's depression inventory meet your investigation into depression? Might not. It's not then a relevant questionnaire. So sometimes people do the opposite process. They find a questionnaire and then devise their project around that because it's been validated and it's reliable and they know they can use it. Fine, go for it. Okay? But if you create a questionnaire, does it need a pilot study? Is it covering the data you need or not? Data analysis is the next section that you need to articulate in your answer for this assignment. How are you going to make sense of your data? How are you going to analyze it? You've collected all these numbers. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to break them down? Will a simple statistical mean, mode, average, medium, standard deviation be sufficient, or do you need more? Okay? Depending again, what is the data, what are you collecting, what is your question?
Can we just say heuristic analysis? Yeah?
No, I need a little more detail.
Yeah, okay. Explaining why that.
Why that? Yes. So you'll need to justify why you're going to be using this approach and how will the data analysis answer your question. By getting these figures or this interpretation or these themes, therefore it will answer my question in this way. What I'm looking for at the end of the day is a clearly defined question, a clear topic, a motivation for the topic, a clearly defined method of gathering that information, and a clearly defined method of analyzing that information. Yeah, simple. Okay? It's not difficult, but it's detail, people. It requires a lot of thinking through to get there. And that's the difficulty, is the amount of thinking down and down and down and down to get to the specifics of what it is. Okay? So this is like you are writing your own cake recipe. What is the recipe? What kind of cake is it? What specific cake is it? It's a sponge cake. It's a chocolate sponge. What are the ingredients? How are you going to use them? Same idea. Okay? Once you got that, the hard work's over. This is the hardest part of any research process. Because once you got it, you follow the recipe. You're done. Okay? You need to think about in the appendices how much detail you need to add in. Are you using a questionnaire? You can add them as an appendices. Okay? Or if you've amended it in any shape or form, is it working? How have you amended it? But ideally, Do not mess about with validated questionnaires because you destroy their integrity.
Appendix, etc. In a qualitative analysis, if there is transcript or interviews, that needs to be all
Transcribed.
transcribed and included in the appendix.
Yep. But not for the research proposal because you haven't done the research yet for your dissertation yet. You'd look at what needs to be transcribed and included. You might not, if you've done a lot, you won't necessarily include every transcribed interview, maybe some examples of some key ones.
In a previous work, I personally didn't transcribe everything. I just put everything in a CD and included in my. I was 300 research with different levels.
Yeah.
It was hour of interviews then.
Yeah, then you wouldn't do something like that and you can't include a DVD in a Turnitin submission. So be careful about questionnaires, look at how you're adapting or changing these, make sure you follow any protocols that are needed for those changes. If you're doing a semi-structured interview or unstructured interviews, how are you going to be dealing with that? What are your interview questions need to be part of your topic? What are the areas you're going to be covering in your interviews? Okay. Present a possible set of questions that could be utilized. Remember what you're working towards, people. It might seem like an endless task, but you will get there. It is within reach. You're halfway through. No.